Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. I am Sherrilyn and I am so glad you found me. Today we have a very, very long episode. There is a lot to go through. It's very intense. There's lots of trigger warnings. I'm going to get into those in a minute, but we have no time to spare. So while you get situated, snuggled, snacked, drinked, all the things, I have a quick message for you. Before we get started, let's settle in, ground yourselves. While you do that, I will tell you about a great tool that is for all of us who use our escape time in the game world. Thanks to our sponsor, Mistplay, all of that gameplay that we do can go towards rewards. Basically, Mistplay is a loyalty app for all of us gamers. So whether you're looking for help with covering maybe like me, an Amazon purchase or 12, or your daily coffee, maybe your Spotify subscription so you can go and listen to the podcast, Mistplay has got you. You can earn rewards simply by just discovering new games and playing them. You know, I am always down for a new game, and Mistplay has a huge catalog, all sorts of genres. So if you like puzzles, they've got puzzles, word games, casual, they've strategic strategy games, adventure, casual, like you name it. Basically, the more you play, the more points you earn, and then you can redeem your points for gift cards from your favorite brands like Amazon, Xbox, PlayStation, Walmart, and more. I found the game Marble Masters and I am loving it. It reminds me so much of my childhood, going to my grandma's cabin that she grew up at, and there was an ice cream shop there and had like arcade games, and one of them was where you blasted the marbles. So I've just been in my nostalgic feels right now, and so thankful because I didn't know about that game. So I found it through Mistplay, loving it, and I love the fact that all of my gameplay can actually go towards points. You can check them out at mistplay.com/Sherrilyn or click the link in my description to download Mistplay for free. You will get an additional 200 points for signing up today. Plus, if you don't lose my code. Use my code Sherrilyn100 inside the app. You'll get an additional 100 free points, which will go towards redeeming your very first gift card. Check out my description for all of the details below. I will also have a comment pinned for you to quickly access that link as well. Thank you again so much, Mistplay, for your support and for, making me feel like I'm working towards something when I'm playing. Okay, today we also have another riddle, and this is thanks to my mom. How cute is she? My mom sent this to me. I either feel like I've heard this one before or I've done it before. Either way, it's really good. So let's do it again. All right, the riddle today is, what gets covered in dirt but always stays clean? Okay, I'm so excited to see everybody's guesses and answers, and I feel like I'm going to be able to tell a lot about a person based on how you reply. All right, let's get started. First, there's a couple thank yous that I have to make. Number one, shout out to Jen from Fundy Fridays. First of all, I just love her. I feel like I'm hanging out with like my best friend when I watch her, and I really appreciate that. So if you like that vibe, go check out Jen. She's amazing. Also the guys at Cultish, who actually interviewed a survivor of this cult, and Not the Good Girl. So there are a lot of people that helped. Jen was my like Gwen Shamblin expert today, who is the woman that we are talking about, and her cult. It's a cult, and all of the horrendous things she has done. But I was really struggling. So if it wasn't for Jen, I don't know if this episode would have been possible. There's an HBO documentary on this. In Canada, though, it's like Canada just does not want us to know about Gwen or have her on our screens. My VPN worked, but I got derailed by not having a US address on file, like associated to the card that I had. So anyways, word is on the street, Jen's coverage was just like even like better than what I would have gathered information wise from there. So again, all the thanks to her. So who is this controversial figure that us Canadians can't even get a doc on? Her name is Gwen Shamblin. And if you think that her hair is a nightmare, wait until you learn about her unsettling views on religion, child abuse, bullying, extortion, and connection to a murder. The nutshell version of Gwen, just so that we can lay down a foundation here, is that she would be like the ultimate girl boss that you would have to face off in if you were playing like girl boss video games. She would be the Bowser of it all to win the game. We need to do a trigger warning though for anybody who is suffering or who is in recovery from ED. Jen also mentioned this in her video that during the research, she was having like really intrusive, awful thoughts about herself and about eating. And I related to that so much just because like based on interviews that I heard from survivors, reading articles from survivors, learning about her and seeing interviews on like national television with Gwen, I was really triggered as well. So I just want to start with that, and that you are amazing, you are beautiful. I cannot stress how horrifying this woman's views are and how dangerous they are. All right. Gwen was born Gwen Henley. She was born February 18th, 1955 in Tennessee to her father, Dr. Walter Henley, and her mother, Betty. Gwen, as far as I know, was an only child, and she was raised in the Christ. She was not raised in the Christ of Church. She was raised in the Church of Christ. From what I gather, they believe in the original New Testament teachings on Christ, and then some of those are that the Bible is true, not altered, must be followed exactly to a T. Jesus is the leader of the church, and they're also very strict about, I guess, like gender roles and stuff like that. Women are not leaders in the church. We will get more into that later on, but that was kind of what her upbringing was. In the 70s, Gwen went to high school, and in the past, she has tried to allude that she was like overweight in high school and in university. She said she knew no end to fullness, but you'll see that there's a very big pattern with Gwen where she says one thing and then her own words say the complete opposite. So really, you can't believe anything that comes out of her mouth. And this is one of those examples because she has said this and then later on in interviews admits that she has only ever been 20 pounds heavier. And she is very tiny. That also includes her being pregnant 2 times. So that, girl, shut up. Also, high school photos of her are not overweight. She was a cheerleader, and Jen from Fundy Fridays killed me because she's like, I am going to go on a limb and say she was a flyer, not a thrower. Oh, it's so good. She's so good. But that makes the whole situation about how she got so hyper-focused on weight all the more concerning because, in my opinion, it just literally stemmed from her being fat phobic and wanting to fix overweight people. After graduating, she really honed in on that. She got an undergraduate degree in dietetics, and a master's in food and nutrition with an emphasis in biochemistry from the University of Tennessee. She also married a man very young. I think they both were young, but she was very young while she was getting her degree, named David Shamblin in 1978. They had 2 children together, a son Michael, daughter Elizabeth. We will also get into them in a little bit. Hold the F on for that. And while tending to her wifely and motherly duties, she also continued her schooling and became a registered dietitian, which led her to be a consultant and a faculty member at the Memphis State University. She was there for about 5 years. And around this time, Gwen started working on her own diet plan. Keep in mind, she's just graduated, not an expert, although she's telling people that she's, really struggled out there and has been able to keep off the weight herself. We know her words later, like she wasn't, but she's also trying to enter a field, make a program to things that she is not aware about, also in terms of like people's health conditions, different needs, illnesses. She's solely going off of her representation or this picture that she's planting of being somebody who was overweight and was able to keep it off like a pro. So in 1986, I don't know why I was so offended that was the year I was born, and I was like, this is when you developed it like my year. I've got to stop like taking those things personally, but I was upset about it. But in 1986, she officially developed the Way Down Workshop and explains it as a program that just much more than weight loss. It was a weight loss. It was a faith-based weight loss program. And she taught her clients to stop focusing on food and just instead shift their focus to God.
Many people have asked me, how do you, after focusing on food for so long, how in the world do you start focusing on God, just like that? And I'm not going to say it happens overnight. I mean, when you go back and look at Jesus, he grew in wisdom, he grew in stature, he grew in favor with God, man. That didn't mean that he was automatically there. He grew. He was small. He grew.
Something fun about it is that Way is spelled W-E-I-G-H. And Gwen says her husband came up with that. It's a play on words, like the way, W-A-Y. It's the way to get your weight off. Cute, right? So this program started as a 12-week, I guess, seminar. There were VHS and audio tapes, and Jen from Fundy Fridays actually read the original workshop book from 97 and said that it was very disturbing, particularly when Gwen talks about her own body issues. She calls herself awful names and insults, describes how flawed she is, or thinks she is, sees all of these, just hyper-focused, very, very hyper-focused on outward appearance. And it's clear, it's so obvious. And that's what gets upsetting with these cases, is because as an outsider, once you kind of get brainwashed, like you start believing like this person's delusions and sickness that started like within themselves, and just not liking overweight people, really, when it comes down to it, if I'm just going to be blunt. The way that her workshop is explained is it just fully supports the fat phobia aspect of it, as opposed to any of this being good intention for somebody's health. The program is essentially where you starve yourself. She tells her followers that overeating stems from a deeper problem, and that you are a sinner if you overeat, and you need to replace your addiction to food with an addiction to God. The cultish guys interviewed a man named Edward, who is now a man, but his mom got into this cult when he was younger, and it affected their entire family. Him, the way he thought about food because of how his mom was thinking about food. It was just, really, really upsetting, especially in those like child years, to be hyper-focused and that just be everything that you as a family think about. And something that we need to remember how this kind of took off is this was not, if this became something today, I believe enough people would be in an uproar to get it shut the F down. But because of what the beauty standards were at the time, this program grew. Like, it took off. She had started teaching just small classes out of her garage. Then she moved up to malls and eventually taking over churches. The growth was insane. And when I say this part, it's not like to compliment in any way, but like they were goals. Like the growth goals were goals. Looking at it from a numbers game is just wild. So by 94, the program was offered in about 600 churches and 35 states. Within 1 year, it went to 1,000 churches and 49 states, as well as expanding into Canada. We didn't want you. And Great Britain. Apparently we did. Because the next year, 96, so this is 2 years, it was in 5,000 churches. And then at this point, people who were a part of it were also able to host it in their homes. So we have, no idea who's having these Way Down workshop parties in their living room. It went on to grow into like a flourishing business. There was over 40 people who were working for it in the headquarters that they had in Franklin, Tennessee. And then Gwen started teaching like the annual seminar conventions. Kind of makes me think of like the way like MLMs do that, get together and like hype everybody up. And they started doing that on a year week-to-year basis. By 98, the workshop had over 250,000 members. It got so big that eventually Gwen couldn't even go to many of these seminars and conventions, so she just really focused on videotape and DVD to get passed around so you could just watch her whenever, wherever you wanted. And one of the reasons that I do think that it took off the way that it did was, like I said, because of the society norms in the 90s. Like, the pressure to be skinny in that time it was crazy. I mean, even as a child, I remember looking at the Olsen twins and being like, oh my gosh, like, why can't I see my spine? I'm sorry if that's like a trigger for anybody. It's a trigger for me to think back on that. But that is where our society was, where we thought it was cute. I mean, it's literally called like heroin shape. So that was a focus. Gwen took off. And even though she thought that she could hide behind her credentials of being, like having a master's, really at the end of the day, she did not care what damage she was doing to people's bodies, which is what we know now. Like, you look at people with eating disorders. I'm going to say Eugenia Cooney, who we're watching in real time go through this right now. And something that I've seen multiple times mentioned, and I think it's so important to know, is that there is a certain time that your body is past the point of return. So yes, we may be seeing somebody who is currently like alive right now, but within the body, things start shutting down and they just stop working. Like, you can't turn around from that. So it happens a lot, and is definitely what was happening with this program. All she cared about was people getting skinny and the numbers on the scales and, clocking in your weight multiple times a day. And it didn't consider anybody with any imbalances to their hormones, anybody who had food intolerances, whether they were, diabetic, they were insulin resistant. The program, for lack of a better term, was basically one size fits all, which is not the case with diets at all. And what's worse is when it did come to those disorders like anorexia or bulimia, Gwen believed that those disorders could be cured by her program. On top of that, she also thought that she could cure addictions like to alcohol and drugs, despite not having any knowledge or experience in any of those areas either. In a nutshell, what Gwen was doing was using shame, guilt, fear to motivate people to starve themselves. And this is something that we see a lot in faith-based cults and in diet. So like, she's combined the two of them. I want to read one quote from her just to kind of get a feel for the things that she was instilling in people's minds. So she said, if you stay in love with the refrigerator, you will look like a refrigerator. Another quote on one of her tapes, when you decide I'm going to eat, but you're not at God's hunger point, you've listened to Satan. Like, what? It is so predatory. It is so disgusting. And then to meld the two, like people's insecurity and your fear when it comes to diets and overthinking and just becoming like so obsessed with it, and then also intertwining that with God. Like, whenever it comes to like fear-based religions, that I check out. I'm like, please don't be scared to live your life. It's just so disgusting. Some people have tried to have the argument of like, oh, like she's trying out intuitive eating. And that's not what this is at all. She is telling people you cannot eat until you reach God's hunger point, which is basically past the point of your stomach even growling. It's like to the point where you're feeling actual discomfort and pain. And once you get there, it's not about enjoying a nutritional meal to sustain you until the next point that you reach this point of starvation. You severely lower your portion size. And when I saw her showing an example on Tyra, I was just like mortified. Here, you can watch it.
What you would have done, everybody, is just cut it in half, okay? Because a restaurant serves too much, or get a Happy Meal. Get a child's portion.
So cut it in half.
Yeah. Here's what's next, is that you have to make every bite exactly like you want it.
Oh, exactly like I want it to taste.
Yeah.
So choreograph my food. Okay,
know,
how do I eat this? Because what I would do is, this is like about 3 bites.
You want to cut it? Let's try cutting it. Let's try cutting it.
Cut up?
Let's do this. Let's cut it in little bites. but I want to
gosh.
make them pretty. Do you not like lettuce and all that on there?
Yeah, let's throw some lettuce on it. I'm choreographing this, y'all.
Okay, here.
Okay, I like
Get it right.
lettuce.
Get it right. You want to take a bite of that?
Yeah, this
Get
one?
your bite. Yeah, okay. And then, but
Now what do I do? Just throw it in?
did you put enough salt? Yeah, that's okay. That's.
I
yeah.
can pop this?
Please, yeah.
So what am I supposed to do now?
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Keep it in my mouth long?
Okay, here we go. I get the right amount of salt on it, and then I, eat a bite, and then we put you can put it back down if you want to.
Oh my God, put it down. Put one fry down?
Now listen, I find great benefits myself personally from fasting. I know it can be controversial, but I believe if you're doing it properly, if you properly educate yourself, you have a healthy relationship with like nutrition and eating according to your benefits and your personal needs, it can be useful. So when I saw her telling Tyra how to eat, because anybody who fasts knows how important it is to refuel by getting enough calories, enough protein to sustain you until like your next window. You need to eat a lot. So when I see like the actual proof of like how she's teaching people and then learning about ex-members' experiences where it's told like you do not eat for days. I think it was Edward, or maybe it was like one of the articles that I wrote about a survivor whose mother like didn't eat for like 40 days. So if you've gone that long and then you refuel and you're told like, oh, it's okay to have like 2 French fries, load it with salt and take 1/4 of your burger. I raged like, oh my gosh. And then I just remembered that this woman had a degree and like just tried to fall back on that when nothing about her degree obviously went into consideration with her program at all. Another quote from Gwen talking about her workshop is, "The way down teaches us that we have to face little death of ourselves every day. A death to ourselves is our will. It is the core of obedience." And she uses the example of what she means by that by saying that if you have a desire of eating, you must run to the opposite side of your house than from where your fridge is. Get away from the food, get down on your knees and pray to God to remove that desire from you. She talks a lot about how pure and good it feels to feel empty and that your body desires that. Also teaches you phrasings and things to say to distract your family when they are asking why you aren't eating. It's so fucked up. Like, it's so messed up, you guys. You're also told to track your weight multiple times a day. And I am a proud anti-weigher now. I became a slave to it at one point in my life. It was so unhealthy. I would get so upset if there was like a pound gained. And I didn't know enough about my own body, about food, about nutrition, about salt. Like, so it could have, the pound could have been from the fact that it was that time of the month for me, or it was approaching, or maybe I had a little bit of too much soy sauce with my sushi one day. But I thought that it was me. I can't imagine like multiple times a day weighing in. And being somebody who did come from a generation that was very hyper-focused on that, like I had said in the beginning, it upset me even more when I learned that her program wasn't even about just like teaching, her members like this garbage. It also encouraged you to instill these beliefs, thoughts, values in your children.
They've never had to deal with it. They've never had to deal with overweight. And it is so wonderful.
We know you really care and want to help your children and grandchildren so that they never go through the pain of overweight.
Jen from Fundy Fridays, like I said, had subjected herself to reading this. Like, thank you again, girl. There's no way I would have been able to do it. And she talks about one of the areas of the book where Gwen gets into this, saying that starting, for parents starting at birth, basically, you need to hone in on your infant's hungers. You can feed on demand, but you have to make sure that you know the difference between cries of comfort and cries of discomfort and a wet diaper. You should never finish off a serving size that is determined by a baby food company. And since breastfeeding mothers don't have like a tool to gauge what serving size the baby's getting, you need to trust the infant's hunger and fullness cues, and suggests that you should be breastfeeding, for as long as you can to just go on that. I mean, first of all, not everybody can breastfeed. Another thing, everybody is different. Just like every adult and their needs are different. So every baby is different. Each one of my children did not follow the same feeding rules at all. Would have been nice, but they didn't. She goes on to say that if your child is overweight by the time you're joining this program or reading this book, don't worry. Once you focus on your own obedience, it is going to trickle down and make an impact on your children. And so they are going to learn like the basic needs of hunger. And a great way to start them learning that is to get them on their own weigh down workshop program and box. So like they have their name, they do their weigh-ins. This would be a great episode for the whole, like the heart monitor thing that I was talking about. She teaches parents that when their children say, my tummy's hungry, but you don't believe that it's actual hunger, that it's only head hunger, you put the food that they're desiring in a plastic bag with their name on it, and then the child can see it, so they know that it's there, but really all they're wanting is attention. So redirect them. Go do an activity. And once you've distracted them, then bring them back to the plastic bag and point out to them that you've completely forgot about the food. You didn't need to eat that. Don't ever be a member of the Clean Plate Club is Gwen's philosophy. So the focus on food is just absolutely, it's insane. It's so upsetting. It's disgusting. But it made her very wealthy, and it drew in a lot of loyal followers, to the point that in 1999, she founded her own church, the Remnant Fellowship Church in Franklin, Tennessee. Now, though, I do believe that the new building is in Brentwood on like 40 acres, which, what does that tell you? Like, compound, like, you're a cult. Now, the reason why the church is called the Remnant Fellowship is because they believe that they are the only remaining true church and that all the other churches out there are false. And she went on to upset a lot of people when she started this church. She had ended up sending out an email that a lot of Christians said was anti-Trinitarian. Her email, in a nutshell, was basically that there is a distinct hierarchy between Jesus and God, which is a controversial belief because the Christians' belief on the Trinity, it teaches that the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are united in one entity, one God, and that they are like co-equal. So with Gwen's email, she's saying that Jesus is not equal to the Father. There are different hierarchies, and God is here and Jesus is not close to God. So it was a really big thing. Even I heard they talked a lot about it on the Cultish podcast, where they interviewed Edward, whose mother was in it. He was in it as a child. And he really talked about remembering that backlash and just everybody kind of being up in arms. She had book deals that were canceled over this. A lot of pastors and stuff were calling her out. The workers that she had for the Way Down workshop were just getting blasted with phone calls, just cussing them out and stuff. People were pissed. They were even sending back her program. In typical cult leader fashion, Gwen responded to this by just saying that this was a witch hunt, and if her followers, still believed not to fear, because there are, tons of other churches that she was a part of that were still teaching her philosophy, so focused on keeping them there. But that's also very controversial because she put her employees, who were followers that now turned into her workers, in very particular situations. Before she had a church, it was just the Way Down workshop that people were working for her for and were happy to do that. But then when she opened up her own church, there was a lot of pressure from people to join this church. So then when you couple that with now she's pissing a lot of people off in that world, a lot of those employees were kind of like stuck between a rock and a hard place, like choosing between their jobs and careers that they had poured a lot of time and energy into, and then their beliefs. She ended up getting sued by several employees who had said that like basically there was religious discrimination. Gwen had told them that in order to be an employee, you basically needed to attend her church as well. Like that was part of your job. Those who didn't agree with that were all of a sudden let go. Their positions were just like canceled, or they would find somebody who was like a better fit for the job. And then those who did stay, who did feel like something wasn't sitting right, but thought, okay, let's just give this a try. There's a way to understand like how they did. And that is that Gwen, even in interviews, she won't say it. We'll see like an example of this in a minute, but she alluded, and her followers alluded to the fact that she was like a prophet. She got messages from God that she was the only true church. There's nothing wrong with what she's saying because this is God who is, going through her to give messages. So the people who wanted to stay are trying to be like, okay, like who am I to go against God if like this is what Gwen is saying, and I've been with her this long and I've trusted everything that she's saying. What do I have to lose? But then slowly started seeing that it had nothing really at the end of the day to do with religion and everything to do with money. Those who were at her call center said that if somebody was calling, even just like with a question, maybe it was about the church, who knows? Like when's the next meetup? I don't know. It didn't matter what the phone call was. And if you knew the person on the other line was already a member, you were always to ask if they had Gwen's latest book or product, which there was a lot. It wasn't just the books. They had like merch, CDs, videos, keychains, all the things. So those who have come forward who are in that situation and were able to get out and remove themselves were able to see that there was like the money was the motivation here. It had nothing to do with faith. Even one woman who left and had sued Gwen, they settled out of court, but the lawsuit had said that she basically was fired because she was praying on her lunch hour, and she had attended a different church, so she was praying, and Gwen told her that she was not allowed to do that. She was technically on like work time, and she's not paying anybody to pray. She doesn't need anybody's prayers, and she already has enough people that she pays good money to pray. So don't need your prayers, just sell a keychain. When she was on Larry King Live, she was answering, phone questions, and there was a caller who did accuse her of just being money hungry gremlin. And she answered, she's like, absolutely not. Like, this is not about money. Half of the money that we earn goes to the government, and then the other half goes to the programs, and to just keep it going. Like nothing to her. And we'll go further into like how her own words and actions about her money and the church like actually ended up playing out. We'll get there in a little bit. But just like on a surface layer, looking at her and her lifestyle, like you don't need her own words to prove that that's not accurate. Like it's very obvious that she was profiting immensely. She lived very extravagantly, had a huge house, very fancy cars, like the works. And even the actions by members that would come to the church. So whether you had come to the church from the Way Down workshop, or whether you came to the church by being referred by like a family or friend, which was heavily encouraged. It was like, recruit. Once you came into the church, if you weren't already a member of the Way Down workshop, you needed to register for classes and keep those going. We see that a lot. Like I think about, the Twin Flames universe, something like that. They've started a program, then start to mix religion and then intertwine the two, and then use fear, being like, God needs this. Like I created this through God, and you need to buy all of my products, which is expensive. Like I think that it's like a $20 a month subscription, or I think it's $20 a month. And then, or you can buy like $250 for like the year or whatever for Way Down TV. Like they are growing. The business is growing. The people are not growing because it is implied through the Remnant Fellowship also. So this is more of the melding of the weight loss and the church. So the message within Remnant Fellowship is the faster you lose weight, the holier you are. And that's where I have just like the biggest problem, because you know what, having a successful business is fine. Like there's, if that is what your goal is, and that is very clear and it's out there, that's okay. But like straight up lying, saying that you're doing one thing and it obviously is motivated by money and something completely else, like it's so deceitful. And that's the best way that I can explain Gwen. Like just very manipulative, deceitful. She's just not a good person. Her comments about the Holocaust, yeah, they just show the type of person that she is and the lack of compassion that she has and what her motivation is. One thing that she said repeatedly that did not sit well with a lot of people, myself included, is she would say to like workshop employers or ex-employees, friends, a lot about the Holocaust. Like she would reference the Holocaust to keep in mind like what the end goal was. So she would use the fact that the Jewish people ate less food while they were in concentration camps and they lost weight. She was actually called out on this several times. One time during a news interview, the anchor on this, the reporter, he followed Gwen like from the get-go, just sniffed out something in her hair from the get-go and knew like she was no good and called her out on this stuff. And he said, like, so you're telling me that you are using the example of the Holocaust and concentration camps as proof that if you eat less, you lose weight. And she's like, she just straight up lied. She's like, I've never said that. And then he's like, well, you did. And then directly quotes her and she's like, oh, well, yeah, no, like I've absolutely used it as an example, but do I use it over and over and over? And her lawyer actually like straight up takes her out of this interview like a child, because her words constantly are used against her. I loved the calling out, because it's like she just tries to like skirt against things and just be like, oh yeah, I have, but like, isn't it true? And this reporter is just like, that is not the point. Like you are literally saying that people in it was forced starvation. They lost weight, and you are trying to apply this method to your followers. And she goes, well, yeah, like I mean, I've been using it as an example and people have responded because it's true. What? Again, it goes back to the image that this is just all focused on her fat phobia, and then her misconception of like, if you are overweight, like that you don't look good, or you are not, I don't know, educated or smart, or she's just, oh my God, I'd love to throat punch people. Not really, like that's, well, actually I couldn't throat punch her even if I wanted to, so I guess I don't have to say like that is like just a joke and not to kill me. We'll get into that in a minute. But anyways, there's no way around it other than the fact that, yeah, she's just a terrible person who thinks so much less of somebody who has some extra weight or is overweight, and they're not good enough. They aren't educated enough. It's so, yeah, I don't know how many times that I can just say that it's so disgusting, but her own words say, you do not make the church look good if you are overweight, or if your children are, or if your children are not obedient, and we will get into that as well. But I did read a article from a gentleman named John Sundholm. I'll link the articles that I came across for you to read, like somebody's like firsthand experience, because I think that that's much more powerful. But he talks about that, like where he had lost a lot of weight and it was not healthy and it consumed him, but all anybody in the church cared about was the outside appearance. And when he had lost weight, it was all like, oh, like come, like be the success story, like come and talk on the stage. And he had gone, I believe it was to university, and gained a little bit of weight, and was due to go to a convention, I believe, and be a speaker, and had said like, okay, yeah, like so excited, was talking to one of the coordinators and had mentioned that, you know, was just like had put on like a little bit of weight. And then all of a sudden they're like, okay, we'll get back to you. And I think it was Gwen or somebody said like via Gwen or spoke for Gwen that we don't need you this year actually. And you know, get back on. And once you get back to that goal, then you can come. So, I mean, it's, there's no way of justifying any of this or thinking that it's anything other than what it is, and that it's fat phobia. And something very particular, interesting about Gwen is she does this thing where she like there's like a convenience to her control and her power. And what I mean by that is when it comes to her church and her business and her followers, like she is the face, but in the same breath, her views and those who are close to her are very sexist when it comes to like other people. Like they're very big on women obedience and women submission to man, like very patriarchal. And it's funny because it's almost like she tries to like imply that she does this to a degree, but like she's obviously running the show. She's the face of it. So it's like a front, like making sure that like all of her female followers like follow in line because she has like basically everybody within her church is like a male leader. So she won't allow herself to be called pastor. And that could stem from like her upbringing where there are no leaders in the church. But she's okay with being called a prophet if other people say it, but she won't say it herself, but definitely alludes to the fact that she's a prophet and like a direct connection to God. She has been asked in multiple interviews, like, are you a prophet? And she says, I don't believe I know what my gift name is. I wrestle with that. It's like the whole like, oh, I don't want to say it, but behind the scenes, like it's her way or the mother effing highway. But the front to public is that she's like this obedient whatever. And it's because she wants people to be like obedient to her, but make it seem like they're being obedient to God and man. Anyway, it's the way of wording that she'll say like, I don't think it matters what my gifts are, but let's just say I do believe that God is using me to set people free. So that's the implication. Now, because of this, like her heavily alluding to the fact that she's, you know, a gifted speaker or God is working through her, and that her church, Remnant Church, was the only true church, and people are spreading this. There are a lot of people joining the masses, like just dying to be a part of this. But they didn't come just for the church. Gwen had positioned herself and this empire very strategically. There was like a whole umbrella under the Remnant Fellowship. They had a real estate company. They had, you know, like a mechanics. There were homeschooling. They ended up having this big event space. There was a financial planning company, contractors. In fact, they had Exodus Industries, which basically like provided their community with plumbing, electricity, roofing, all of the things. It was a business for Jesus. And what she was doing was building this community that only she and her businesses had a hand in, which is insane. Like, I think any cult leader who has like the means and the influence and the money to do this is exactly what the goal is. This is what I believe is what's trying to go on with like the Twin Flames universe. They don't want anybody coming in. They don't want you to need to leave or go somewhere or have any outside influence because they want all of the power and they want to isolate you and make you dependent on them, not just emotionally, religiously, literally dependent in order to survive, like your livelihood, your job, your home. There was no need to go out. I mean, like even if you wanted to have parties, she had bought this 25-acre like pre-Civil War plantation that she called Ashlon. And this was like 5 minutes from her church. Like everything is just all within this little community. And like, yeah, so if you wanted to like go out and have a party, don't you worry. Like we host all the weddings, events, everybody's like members, whatever is held here. And Jen had showed, I just laugh like every time I think about her. I just love her. Please be my friend. Jen showed a clip of some of the events that happened here. And she like points out like the little Victorian ghost children. And I died because it's true. Like there's like this, you know, B-roll of of these events that are happening, and it's like all the children are just like all like in their little dresses, and all of the women look like Gwen. I've been watching a lot of Stepford Wives. I think Jen actually said like it looks very Stepford Wives, but right now that's my comfort movie for some reason with Nicole Kidman, and it made me think about that. Allegedly, there would be, so within these parties and festivals that would be on the plantation, there would be food, but former members said that they didn't eat. They could drink, but they couldn't eat. And in the early days, Gwen would request like, like baskets of like food or whatever be delivered, donated. And then that ended up changing, and it was like, just bring money, just bring a check. You don't need to eat, just drink and drink more. So you give me more. This cult is also very Scientology in terms of surveillance. So if it's not enough that you like work, eat, breathe, sleep, live for this place, there are top leaders who are always watching you. They monitor your social media. If you are talking to somebody outside of the church, like they have records of all that. There are eyes on you at all times. And they would do things that are called like family checkups. So it's like they would specifically go out and investigate church members to see if they could find like any wrongdoing, to kind of like have a meeting and call you out on it so that you knew like, we've got something over you. So if you were kind of like straying, you'd be forced kind of to be at their mercy. Oh my God, this part is going to make me rage. It's going to make you rage. They had so much control over their members that it was, if you were going through something and thought, okay, you know what, maybe therapy would be beneficial in this situation. Yeah, you weren't allowed to do that. You were not allowed to go to therapy. And as an outsider looking in, it's obvious why. Like the second you went to like an outside therapist and talked about your high control starvation church, they would probably try to undo that brainwashing and, make you see the light, so to say. So you weren't allowed to do that. You also weren't allowed to take medication. So if you had depression, you weren't allowed to take anything for that. The church believed that depression and antidepressants equated to you were a sinner. Something was wrong. You needed to keep praying. You were not doing enough. And Lord, I would literally pay money to see myself be taken off medication, not have any form of therapy, and just like pop the F off on Gwen and just be like, Gwen, like this is how mental we are. But yeah, like if you were a part of Remnant, you had to pretend like everything was fine, and you could never make the movement look bad. And if you were a true member, like if you had really prayed enough and were following enough, like you shouldn't have to have medication because you should be fine. Like there is no such thing as that. Like it's because you're being punished, because you're a sinner, because you're not doing enough. And there have been people who were in that situation who had gotten off their meds. Oh my God, it would just breaks my heart to think about it. Somebody thinking like, okay, there is something wrong with me. I can get through this. Like I can't be on this. I'm a sinner. And if I don't get off of this, like I'm not going to go to heaven. So to be that brainwashed to get off medication, there was one wife and husband that were sharing their examples, their experience off of this or from this. And this woman weans off of her medication, and she said, like the effects of maybe the medication still being in her for a little bit, also like being on a spiritual high, like lasted for a little bit. It wasn't like immediately she went off and all of a sudden she fell apart. It's not usually how it works. And I think that that's why people can get in a really dangerous, like, downward trajectory, because you kind of coast for a little bit. And then it's like, oh, you start spiraling and you're not realizing you're spiraling because you're still on that high. And I can't imagine what it would have also been like with having people in your ear brainwashing you, like just telling you how bad it would be if you failed and then you went back to it. But this woman was explaining, like after that kind of subsided and she started spiraling through no fault of her own. Like people on antidepressants, I'm just going to use myself as an example. Like I have a chemical imbalance. Like that's just the way that I'm wired, and that's hereditary. So to be made to feel that there's something wrong with you, or that I have this because I'm a sinner. Oh my God, that makes me sick. Just throat punch. So yeah, this woman's husband explains how two male leaders come to me, because remember, goes back to, the male, it's Gwen, but that she speaks through the males who also influence the males who control over their wives. And these leaders were telling him to take his wife's medication and flush it down the toilet because man is over medicating her. Oh my God, it gets better. It gets fucking better. Not, you know what I mean. So when the question was brought up of, okay, I need this because if I don't take this, like self-harm can happen. Okay. When that was brought up, the leaders they'd shrug it off and say, well, like what's there to be concerned about? Like, what's the worst that can happen? If you die, so what? Like, you get to go to heaven. Can you imagine? Yeah. I don't know, if you're new here and I'm popping off, I don't play when it comes to misconceptions of mental illness. When I hear about this kind of stuff, like I want to be like, hey, I just want to chat. I just want a little talk with you guys. Let's go in a room somewhere. I just want to talk. I just want to see what your guys' views on mental illness are. And I want to show you how crazy I can be. And that would just be like the angst in Sherrilyn, not like the mental illness. Okay, whatever. I'm like literally feeding them. They're like, this is why, people. So if you think to yourself, and I did this as well, like it is so easy to just like, to be like, oh, like how could you, think that, oh, excuse me, the curses are happening. They're like, silence. It happens over time. This is not just like you meet somebody and then all of a sudden they completely control your life. And we've kind of like put the puzzle pieces up into this point, being just like slowly taking over your family, taking over your train of thought, your vulnerability, preying on all of those things and inserting livelihoods and church and religion, all those things. But on top of that, there was also a lot of fear. Like there was a lot of fear, even though, Gwen wants to just be like, I'm so happy. Everything is good. I'm positive. She's a very intimidating person and allegedly kept like a list of curses that would happen to people if they left Remnant. And this was very well known. So people were very scared of something like that happening. Not only was like weight gain one of them, but it would be like, you'd get a disease or you'd miscarry, like just terrible things would happen to you if you left. And so it just made people stay, and it made people further dependent on her and look up to her to be like this image of, I don't even want to say it, but in her mind, like perfection, right? Like, and other people who followed her thinking that that's perfection, which it absolutely isn't. But nonetheless, there's no doubt a lot of people blindly followed Gwen. And what that entailed as well, on top of all of the other problematic shit that we have talked about, was also her views on discipline with children. And I am not talking about timeouts, as if starving them wasn't enough. Gwen believed in order to have like mini remnant Stepford children, you had to abuse that into them. Direct quote from her is, if they're, meaning the children, if they're not scared of spankings, you didn't spank them. And if you haven't spanked them yet, you don't love them. You love yourself.
If they're not scared of a spanking, you haven't spanked them. If you haven't really spanked them yet, you don't love them. You love yourself.
Was that yourself you just heard on that recording or not?
Objective form.
Those were sound bites.
Well, I understand that, but was that
okay.
your voice or not?
Yes.
This isn't a perfect example of Gwen like saying and doing one thing and then trying to reverse. So this during a deposition for a child custody case that we're going to get into in a minute. There's so much. Her own words, again, are used against her. And it's like, is that you that says that? And she's like, those are sound bites. Yeah, is it you, Gwen? What the fuck are you talking about? Like, oh my gosh. Okay. Remnant advocated so hard for parents to show their children love through abuse that it eventually led to a child that was within the Remnant, like was a part of a family in Remnant, to be tortured to death, basically. In 2003, church members Joseph and Sonia Smith had been acting on instructions from Gwen and other members, different ways to discipline their 8-year-old son, Joseph. They would do things like lock him in a room by himself with just a Bible and a photo of Jesus on the ceiling, and he would be in there for days, even weeks. sometimes. They would abuse him in extremely horrific ways, like hitting him with foot-long glue sticks, belts, and heated hangers. He also had to have his hands tied with ropes and was only given a bucket as a toilet. There's also reports that an older son, so Joseph's sibling, would sometimes hold him down while this abuse was being implemented, which, oh my God, I cannot even imagine what that would have been like for Joseph and also that child who this is being like instilled in, trying to live with this for, the rest of their life. So during the day on October 8th, 2003, Joseph was beat basically throughout the day. And that was something that the parents were taught, that it's not just like a spank, like it's heavy and it's multiple times a day. Like you don't let off of it. It's not like one thing, like, and then you're done, you've learned your lesson. Like it's a constant reminder throughout the entire day. And he was hospitalized for being so brutally assaulted and passed away. And the medical examiners had concluded that he died as a result of acute and chronic abuse. So remember that, because the way that this is tried to be played off, like this is directly from the medical examiners. They are trained, unlike anybody in the church, to look for these signs, and saying that this is not something that was just going on that day. Like this was there were so many signs and stages of abuse, new and old, on this poor baby's body. And something that the investigators wrote in their report was that they had seen this, like just like prior to the medical examiner. It was very obvious that there were, extensive bruising all over his body in different stages of healing or fresh wounds, and that the parents did not show any sign of remorse. They were very upfront that they were like, this was just part of their discipline, and they were very defensive about their religion, and that, like, how dare you question like my discipline? Like this is my religion. This is religious discrimination. What's more upsetting is I learned that Joseph was not the only one. Allegedly, another child in this family, Malik Smith, had died 11 weeks before Joseph, and his cause of death has been reported differently. There are claims that it was pneumonia and also SIDS, but then like when we look at what poor little Joseph went through, like I'm just like, oh my God. And then also you consider like what Gwen like teaches like for the babies and like infant stages, like, oh my gosh, Jurassic Jail, you guys, Jurassic Jail. And if anybody new here, I have to like constantly I remind people about Jurassic Jail because we're getting new followers. And Jurassic Jail is basically Jurassic Park, but instead of the lamb, we replace the lamb that the T-Rex feeds on with these types of human beings. Now, Gwen, when this all came up, like she's like, oh my God, like this goes up against everything. Like, how dare you accuse me of knowing like what's going on? So if that was true, and that's the way that she tries to act, like she preaches, and you heard about this, like you'd be like, okay, Gwen, like show up, put your money where your mouth is, like that you'd be horrified, right? Like that this had just happened to a child within your congregation, your cult. No. When this happened, the Remnant Church paid for the legal defense for the Smiths. They also created a website called The Smiths Are Innocent. And on the website, they claimed that the boy died from eczema, even though he was head to toe covered in bruises, not eczema, not to mention all of the court transcripts that go over the extent of abuse this poor child endured. This website also, it just reiterates like the thought process of Gwen and her followers, that while they're talking about what happened to this little baby, they mentioned that the father and the mother, like their success stories. Joseph, he lost 80 pounds, and Sonia, she lost 150 through the Way Down workshop. And then they've got a link to go to Gwen's website to buy the curriculum yourself. Are you like, I can't make this up. I can't make, this is Jurassic Jail. It needs to happen. Like I'm not even like joking. It needs to happen. They go on to make like a statement on behalf of the Smiths that says that they're doing great. They are model inmates. Other inmates respect them, and that they have been instrumental in bringing Bible classes into the facility, into the prison, and that Remnant Fellowship is offering Bible studies and fellowship in many prisons across the country because of the Smiths. Allegedly, they were also awarded 2014 Faith-Based Contributor of the Year by the Georgia Department of Corrections. The Smiths were ultimately sentenced to life plus 30 years in prison on March 27th, 2007. Which is great, but I mean, just the fact that the action of the church paying for their legal fees in something that is so brutal and sickening, that just shows you everything that you need to know about their views and beliefs. Now, I do think that it's really important to mention that according to ex-members who were actually there, seeing, hearing all of that stuff, that this was not an isolated incident within the church. Like, this was happening all over the church, children being abused, basically for the parent to prove how much they loved, their child and God. And yeah. So after Joseph's death, the church was raided by police, FBI, TBI. Gwen talks about that a lot, being like, they raided, they couldn't find anything. They looked through handbooks, da-da-da-da-da. And it's like, okay, of course you're not going to write about this in a handbook. Like, these are things that were discussed in conversations with Gwen, with other leaders that people of the church looked up to. And once again, Gwen's, convenience of not being involved and trying to pass the buck, and not being aware. It was, what's the word I'm looking for? Come on, Sherrilyn. Recordings showed that she's a liar. She did know about it. There was actually an audio recording that came out that is the voice of Joseph's mother sharing at a service, talking to Gwen, that proved that Gwen knew exactly what was going on. In the recording, Sonia says, "I did exactly what Ted told me to," which is somebody that they, look up to and listen. "I took everything out of his room. We got everything out of there. And he stayed in there from Friday until Monday with only a Bible." And instead of Gwen saying something like, "Oh, that's a little bit harsh. That's a lot. Not cool. Not something that I support and endorse," in front of all of her members, she praises the Lord. She's like, "We are spoiling these children. We are ruining their lives. We can't allow them to think about themselves at all. So thank you, Sonia, for sharing that." Her own words, once again. To this day, like I said, the Remnant Fellowship says that, yeah, Joseph died because of eczema and not child abuse, which is so disgusting. And I hope that the little Victorian ghost children haunt their dreams for eternity. Now, the Smiths' defense was not the only time that the church became far too involved in their members' lives and families and court battles. On multiple occasions, the remnant paid for lawyers to mainly fight spouses in court for sole custody of children, especially when there was one spouse in the church and then the other was feeling like it was a cult. Edward talks about that on the Cultish podcast, about his dad looking over at him one day and because he went to the church and was like, "Okay, son, we are in a cult." Jen said that in the documentary, they also talk a lot about how you are encouraged to sign custody of your children over to the church in your will, which so disturbing. And the whole subject of divorce is, again, it's a whole other thing in itself. We'll kind of simplify it by saying Gwen's stance originally on divorce was very, we'll say, traditional. In 2001, she's on the news. She's saying, America's in trouble. The number of divorces out there are just we're going to hell. And she made it very clear that those were also her expectations for other married women in the church. You stay there. A lot of ex-members remember that they were not allowed to go against their husband's wishes at any time. There was allegedly rules that you were only to ask your husband about something once and never again. So if it was about a decision, it was your husband's, view of what the decision was going to be. And if you didn't like it, it didn't matter. You do not ask again. The answer is not going to change. if women were not submissive to their husband in any way, then the husbands would go and complain to the male leaders. And then it's alleged that these women were forced into counseling at the church, like with the leaders, no trained counselor, professional, whatever. A lot of ex-members also said that they were told by the leaders that they had to stay in marriages even if their husbands were unfaithful and had multiple affairs. They would train them or coach them, counsel them, that's the word, to forgive them. So they would like really hammer in like any type of scripture that talks about forgiveness and that you need to do everything that you can to welcome him back with open arms. So again, she needed the appearance, right? Stepford, come on. You need to have a strong family unit. She heavily preached, that divorce was wrong under any circumstances. And then a former washed up actor came to church. His name was Joe Lara, and he had a very interesting background. Like he was up to a lot. When he was younger, he worked in Hollywood. He was in quite a bit of low budget films. Then his first like leading role was a like one of those movie of the weeks. It was Tarzan in Manhattan in 1989. And then because of that, he ended up getting, I think it was like a TV series, Tarzan the Epic Adventures from 96 to 97. So he was in that. And from a very young age, he kind of grew up around the finer things in life. Like he was very pretentious and image, a lot like Gwen, like image was very important. I think his mom was married to like the CEO of Wells Fargo or something like that. Grew up in Newport Beach. And as he got older, he wasn't ashamed to show that he was okay with taking the backseat, like as a man, and having women take care of him, and that, wealthy women that could provide him like the finer things in life. In his 20s, he dated a 50-year-old woman, lived in her home. She gifted him things like motorcycles, and he was living the dream. Allegedly, that he did something to upset this woman, and she kicked him out, lost the bike, all the stuff. So he went on, like continued to sleep around, dabbled with drugs, eventually moved on to a young woman named Natasha, who was a former beauty queen from Yugoslavia. They met in acting class together. They ended up having a baby girl, moved to Nashville so that he could pursue his career as a country music star. And then she ended up just ending the relationship because she was providing everything. Like she was the one who had purchased the home. She paid all of the bills, trying to be supportive with him. Becoming a country music star wasn't really going anywhere, and she just kind of like got sick of it. So he still tried to make it big. He was also a handyman, though, like to sustain, his life. His bio on his own website, it paints himself as quite the accomplished little fella. I recommend like going to check it out, joelara.com. One part, actually, I got offended. It stood out to me. It said he was an accomplished boxer. And like, obviously with my husband, boxing is a huge, huge part of our life. And so I was like, let's look at that up. So I go to like boxrec.com. Yeah, I could find nothing. There is a Joe Lara on there who did have like an accomplished boxing record. But he was from 1931. So unless Joe fathered all the little Victorian ghost children on the plantation and was drinking some like Tuck Everlasting Youth Serum, I don't think they're the same. Anyways, it was through a networking group that Joe went to Remnant Fellowship and then met Gwen. And all of a sudden, Gwen's sermons all changed when it came to divorce. So she had been married for 40 years, and all of a sudden she divorces David Shamblin, and she starts preaching something else. She posts on the church website that God himself divorced Israel, his bride, for turning away from the faith. So kind of like having an out. So there should be no judgment towards saints, which would be like remnant members as they strive to build a pure church. And now I want to say my understanding is like that would basically be a slap in the face to David, because he was kind of behind the scenes of the church, and there's speculation about why some people are like, because he didn't fit the like aesthetic image for Gwen. But in another one was that he was not comfortable with the way that she preyed on people and that this was all about money. Like he saw it, and even though he obviously benefited from it as well, didn't want to like actively be involved. So I would think that to say something like this and give the illusion that he is not, you know, pure, and we have to like just get those type of people out, would have been a slap in the face. Regardless, he made out pretty good financially. Gwen and David had, I think, 18 different properties that they ended up going 50-50 on. There was like over $20 million in properties. She also had to pay him like $3 million just out. And yeah, so once that went through, like she was free to get engaged to Joe, and it's so cringy. It was a big thing. They made it a big deal. It was so over the top. It completely staged. It's filmed. There's fireworks. There's the dramatic voiceover and B-roll. Jen from Fundy Fridays actually like play. I'm not going to put the video. Well, put the video, but not the actual music because she got copyright striked. And I'm not going to do all this work with Gwen Shamblin for fucking nothing. But anyways, because screw her. I'm not making her money. She's the music is to the Shrek love song. I can't. So less than 2 months after her divorce was all done, finalized, her and Joe then go on to have this like lavish wedding. Like just, you thought the engagement was over the top. It just, yeah, over the top. People from, you know, followers of the Remnant Church from all over the world are going there. And I can't imagine like what that would have been like for the women that were in toxic marriages that she told to just like shut up and pray about it. Can you imagine being one of those women who's like looking over to the husband that cheated on you 12,000 times and you were just told to suck it up, and she's remarrying this old Tarzan actor? But with that divorce, you know, like now she's kind of put it out there that it's okay. So you did see a lot of people that now everybody started getting divorced. It was like the thing to do. And then Gwen again had her remnant lawyers out there fighting for custody for you know, the other members, the ones that weren't staying, to get the property for the ones that were staying. And not only were they accused of breaking up a lot of marriages and families like that, but ex-members also, they lost touch and like cut off their families who weren't in the church. And that's because Gwen straight up said, like, you need to stand up for yourself and just get rid of relatives. Like, I don't care if it's your mother, your sister, whoever. If they don't believe, they are idol worshipers and they can't be here, which I think is rich because in my opinion, one of the most idol worshipers at that church was Joe. Again, Jen had showed this clip of him talking about God, and I started cackling. Like, he is so he knows nothing. Gwen's looking at him like, huh? Like, but like, oh, like, you're pretty. Like, and she just lets him do his little like thingy, you know, like he beefed up her Stepford image, so she just like lets him do it out. But he does not know. He is just a prop, and it's very obvious. And yeah, but they went on to start their own YouTube channel called Life with Gwen and Joe, where they spewed their starvation shit. They also tried to get their own reality show called Way Down South. And although Gwen didn't ask much of Joe, and that's clear, there was one thing in particular that she did want to like just get her talents into, and that was Joe's daughter that he had with Natasha, because again, weird thing with the children. So in the documentary, you see a lot of this, and Jen describes her as just like this badass woman. So Gwen and Joe wanted, it's Natasha that's a badass woman if I didn't make that clear, but Gwen and Joe wanted sole custody of his daughter, and it got dirty. And Gwen had the financial backing to just try and break this woman down, which just makes me really, really mad for like personal reasons. But she could try to just drain this mom financially to the point where she was just like, oh my God, like I literally can't fight for my child anymore, and definitely did try to do that. And another way that they tried to gain custody was Joe made up a lot of things about Natasha in terms of when it came to their daughter, like accused her of doing horrific things, abusing her, things that were not true. Joe called the police and said that she had assaulted their daughter. And as their daughter watched, Natasha was arrested, taken away in handcuffs. Fortunately, like the police were able to prove that this was not the case, and Joe was a effing freaking liar trying to abuse the system. And she was cleared of any charges, but they did go to court, and she ended up having to represent herself because she had spent over $200,000 on attorneys that were like, it wasn't going anywhere. Gwen and her lawyers knew how to work the system. They were just dragging their heels, trying to buy more time and sending, like the little, every time you do correspondence back and forth, like lawyers charge for that. Literally, I have a great friend right now going through this where the lawyer, like breaking down the costs, and the lawyer is like, this is for reading emails. Like, it's insane. And if you have the money to do that, this is why a lot of people are losing custody of their children. And it's not because they don't want them. Like they're just depleted. One of the things that Natasha was able to use and prove was that, just like how unhealthy this whole situation was from an outsider looking in and seeing the behaviors that were being like instilled in their daughter when she was with Gwen and Joe. And part of that was that she was not allowed to have any friends that were outside of the Remnant Fellowship. She wasn't allowed to even participate in any activities, like extracurricular activities that were not a part of the church. And she was scared, like to do that, and being told like outside sinners, you got to stay in here in this bubble. And that Gwen's own actions are obvious of just how damaging that is for children, like this pressure to look perfect. And it comes at costs. A lot of costs. And to me personally, some of the most obvious effects of that are when you do look at Gwen's children. Not Jen. Oh my God, Jen, I'm so sorry. Now, Michael, her son, Gwen's son, Michael, and daughter, Elizabeth, they are grown. So there was no need for Gwen to go toe-to-toe with their father, like with David for custody. They also were heavily, heavily involved in the church. So Gwen's son, Michael, was a musician, wrote a lot of songs for the church, performed them, rapper too, colorful little fella. You could look into that. A lot of members saw him as just another prop, another tool, and it was all a control thing. He was just like an accessory to Gwen's image, and that if she truly cared about his happiness, she would have supported his dreams, which were not to be a part of the church. His passion was music. He wanted to get a record deal, worked very hard towards that. And she was just like, no, like you have a record deal with Remnant, like make our music. And it's obvious just even in his appearance, and then based on reports from people who were actually involved in the church at that time, that he was struggling within himself, and then also like to try to make his mom happy. There were times where he would leave and then he would come back and he would just be like really angry. He looked disheveled, like almost like he had just not slept in days, struggled with depression, substance abuse. His weight would go up and down. Every time he was overweight, people said Gwen would like hide him. Just awful. Apparently he was also one of the people that was like forced to stay in a loveless marriage and just put on the really perfect picture for everybody, when really he was just like in a dark space. Another person who like visually you can see the effects of their mother through is Gwen's daughter Elizabeth. Some of the things that she's gone through, in my opinion, is just like the sickest examples of toxic positivity. She was actually born Michelle Elizabeth. She goes by Elizabeth, and she's just like this little robot of her mom. She is so scary, frail, and just appears to have been like extremely manipulative and influenced by her mother her entire life. And it's sensitive to talk about because I do believe she was brainwashed so heavily by her mom that like she is still under that influence to realize how abused she was. One example of the sickening toxic positivity was that apparently Elizabeth had a baby, and the baby passed, and Gwen just tried to pretend like it didn't happen. Now there were close members of the church who did know about the death, and they know like, okay, like all of a sudden one day like the baby passed away. I think they were told that it was because of an illness, and they're all supposed to pray. And then the next Sunday rolls around, and then there's like literally no mention of it, no more prayers, no nothing, everything's fine. And they're told like, do not talk about this, act happy, act perfect. And then they're told that the leaders need to start doing those family checkups, like find something, there's something going on within the church, because Gwen and her family know, like they would never be judged by God. So there is one or more of the members within the church that are sinning so badly, which equates to not starving enough, that her family is suffered because of it. Like, they made Gwen's church look so bad that her grandbaby died. Like, just sit with that for a second. It's so freaked up. Apparently, and understandably so, Elizabeth was never the same after this situation, physically and emotionally. I mean, she looks like a shell of a human. And that is such a toxic, that's like one of the sickest examples of toxic positivity I've ever seen. You see it a lot in MLMs. Like, if you're looking for something, like for an example of like an everyday thing, like nothing in is the company's fault or like your leader's fault. If you don't succeed, it's your fault. You're not working hard enough. You aren't positive enough. Like, everything has to be fine. Oh, like somebody's died, like your child, like don't talk about it. So I've been thinking of like the way to kind of like wrap up like where this has gotten everybody now, and be sensitive as much as I can to like it's not the end of the story, but like, you know, what happened here. When I said that, you know, sometimes I want to throat punch people, and then I was like, oh, I don't really need to say that because I won't ever be able to throat punch Gwen Shamblin. That's because like her physical stronghold and influence came to an end on May 29th, 2001, which was the day, did I say 2001? I lied, 2021. And that is the day that Gwen died. Gwen, Joe, two other couples that were prominent Remnant church members, as well as Elizabeth's husband, her daughter's husband, Brandon, all died in a plane crash while they were on their way to a mega event. There's been different reports on what happened here, but based on experts like in aviation looking at the case, it seemed that Joe lost control, that he had gotten disoriented within the clouds and thought he was going up in the clouds, but really like they had like taken off, gone up in the clouds, and he thought that he was still on that trajectory, but something had happened and he was going down very fast into a lake. Allegedly, this would have all happened very fast, that they wouldn't have even like known or like felt anything. And that does seem to be what happened, also based on a witness report. There was somebody that was fishing at the Tennessee lake, and at the time of the crash, he said he heard what he thought was like a low flying military jet. When he looked, he just sees this aircraft like hit nose down into the lake. Based on what they were able to gather from the wreck, there was also no evidence of anything like mechanical malfunctioning, so this was operational error. Joe did have his pilot's license. I believe he had gotten it when he was like 16 or something like that, but his medicals, his like, and keeping up with the licenses, I don't know a lot about this, but it wasn't up to date. It was expired. And so the Federal Aviation Administration actually suspended the man who had approved Joe to fly with this expired medical certificate. So he should have never, ever, ever been flying. And because he did, all 7 of them on board died. There was not a single person that survived. Now, though her physical presence ended that day, Gwen very much laid the groundwork of fear going on and outliving like her. The church is alive and well, despite even more proof that Gwen only cared about herself, money, and her, like, just her family and nobody else. So after the crash, again, her cards are shown. Now, remember when I said that when someone called in Larry King, she said that half the money went to the government and then the other went to the church and program. That was another lie. When she died, her will left everything to her children. Nothing was left to her church at all. And you'd think, like, if there was, you know, if this was your heart and your soul and your passion and you wanted it to live on, like, you would at least leave something for your church. But no, I believe the estate, so like her children did work something out with the church where they are able to have publishing rights to like any of the programs, and that the building, like they would keep that in the church's name. And then the church like made this public statement thanking Gwen, like, you know, for her generous gift of generosity, like still to this day protecting her image. And I wanted to read and use directly Jen's words from Fundy Friday. her parting words on Gwen, because I think it was so powerful and so well written. Everybody needs to hear it. So she says, Gwen's teachings were never about anything other than creative ways to spiritually abuse oneself and others into the ideal American body type. Gwen's empire was built on the labor of people who came to her for help, but found only verbal abuse, labor exploitation, and relational aggression. Under their leadership, Remnant has left a trail of broken people, abused children, and ignored promises. The Way Down Workshop empire preyed on the worst parts of the American obsession. I also just want to weigh in that it's even like Canadian. I think it's like a world obsession here with weight, and used it to avoid scrutiny for years. That is to say that if the U.S. culture didn't blindly accept all weight loss as good and correct, this shit would have been shut down decades ago. Freaking nailed it. I love her. Literally, you guys, go say hi to her, please. Go say that I sent you so that she knows who I am. Basically, in a nutshell, like, given the time, like, this should have been something that never, ever happened. Never took off. And it's like almost like it started because of people's beliefs and like obsession with the culture of weight loss standards at the time of the 90s. And then it was like that was a draw in for her to build relationships, build this influence. And then from there just like grew and just turned into this bigger monster, where she just had, all she fucking wanted was control and money from people. Really. The fact that it's still running is really upsetting. Like, it needs to be shut down. And this is even something that her son Michael has gone on to agree with. He's like, this is a cult. It was a cult. And he said when he left, it was hard, but he's never felt like more alive and more himself since leaving and since his mom passed. There are a lot of people who were ex-members who have formed their own like support groups. I don't know if this were ever to come across somebody who's part of them that wants to leave, like how you can get in contact with the group for any other former members. But yeah, I think that's so important to just like talk and heal and know that you're not alone. Sadly, her daughter Elizabeth is very much still under her spell. She runs the church, and just looking at her breaks your heart. Like, she is so frail, not healthy. And I mean, like, that's not surprising based on her mom's teachings from like her being born. I cannot imagine being raised with that toxic of a relationship with food from a dietitian. Come on. I've struggled with talking about Elizabeth because I feel for her in a sense. Like, it really upsets me that she is still under the spell and like continuing it. She's still pushing the beliefs of her mom. At the end of the day, though, like, she lost her mom, she lost her husband, her baby, like all like she's had a lot of loss. But in the same sense, like, I have to be harsh in the fact that I don't agree with what she's doing. Like, it's wrong. It's so messed up. Like, this place needs to get shut down. She needs to stop. So she does run the church, even though I do want to say, like, I believe she's not physically there. I don't think she's gone back to the church after her mom's passed, but she's like goes in through recordings. Like, so her voice is played and it's like, it's eerie. She sounds exactly like her mom and is like, we're still moving forward. Like, don't lose sight of the message here. So yeah, they're still going strong. I went and looked on their website, and I mean, like, they're still advertising all of their meetups, church. I don't know. Anyways, it needs to get shut down. So if anybody approaches you and wants you to join their starvation church so that you are thin and you get to go to heaven, like, just run. It's cult. You're in a cult, or you're trying to be recruited into a cult. If you're listening to this and this sounds like the church you go to, you're in a cult. Okay, quick refresher for the riddle. What gets covered in dirt but always stays clean? And if you said coffin and then the body inside, like I thought, and was on the joke that she sent me, we are friends. We are also friends if you got it right, because that means you're so smart and good for you. And the actual answer is soap. So yeah. All right, that's it for me today, you guys. Thank you again, Jen. Thank you, Cultish. Thank you to the people who wrote their own stories that I was able to read. I'm going to link them. Not the Good Girl. There's a lot of things here to put this all together and teach me about Gwen, raise my blood pressure. I'm going to go have a drink. I'm going to go eat. and not feel guilty about it. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to me. I love and I appreciate you so much. I will see you in the next video. I will miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon.